Hi, I'm Edward Cohen. Welcome to Tangent.
Hello, this is Jeffrey Berman. Great to be back here with Edward.
Today on Tangent, we have Alon Gorbonos, founder and managing partner at RE Angels. Hi, Alon. Where does this podcast find you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to participate in your podcast, and I'm now broadcasting live from Williamsburg, New York.
Nice. Definitely among the top 4 New York City boroughs, for sure. Alon, for our listeners, what's your background and how did you get into Proptech venture capital?
Sure. So, as many others, started my career in more corporate America type of, I would say, environment. After business school, worked as a strategic consultant in McKinsey, and then worked a few years as an investor. And in 2017, decided to basically switch gears and become a real estate investor. And I was an owner-operator. I bought, sold, renovated hundreds of millions of dollars of properties from residential to commercial. And through that experience firsthand, I kind of realized how antiquated and how much opportunity there is to put technology and basically integrate the entire tech into the real world or the tangible world. And in 2022, after successfully selling all our portfolio, decided to switch gears and go into this intersection of real estate and technology, which I personally extremely passionate about. I think it's probably the next big thing that's coming, like fintech, a dozen of years ago. And, it's, I think nowadays, we all see that it's happening and it's here.
Great time to sell your portfolio before interest rates started going up. And certainly, so it's super exciting here at Tangent because we have the experienced Proptech OG in Jeff, and we have the up-and-coming newcomer in Alon. So certainly having different points of views. However,
is that an old age joke? Because I don't like it.
The opposite. It's actually you're fresh, evergreen.
That's right. I dye my hair this color.
True. You and Anderson Cooper. The Anderson Cooper call
it. Jeff, I would die with you for evergreen. How about that?
I appreciate that.
So Alon, as part of the RE Angels framework and your take is, and you like challenging the notion that real estate is slow to adopt and slow to adopt technology as well. Tell us what's your take there. How do you see it, and why is that notion maybe certainly not true anymore?
Of course. I think, real estate by definition is a slower pace, right? As an investor, as an owner, as any stakeholder in it, that we are talking about a long-term horizon. And I think because of that, by definition, also the adoption of technology is slower because change just takes more time. With that being said, I believe that where we are now in the timeline, it's substantially different than we were 5 years ago or even 10 or 20 years. It's interesting, when I was starting RE Angel, I was getting a lot of those pushbacks by very senior, very successful real estate people telling me, yeah, we heard this speech many times, but we tried it. Technology doesn't really worth it. It's we're very slow here in real estate. It's not in a good time. It's going downwards. But let's just talk about what happened 2 weeks ago, right? With the settlement of NAR, the National Association of Realtors. This is probably one of the most catatonic shifts that happened in the last decade or so. And I'm sure Jeff can agree to that. It's just something that if I would have known when I started RE Angels, obviously I would have included it in my pitch. But I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's give you another example, right? If I would tell you before COVID that people would be renting apartments without physically being there, probably you would have taken me to the high rise and threw me from the tallest floor and calling me crazy, which today is almost taboo, right? So I think a lot of this technology and a lot of those changes are happening. And, the world is changing in such fast pace, generative AI. Obviously, I can throw all those buzzwords, but it's really demanding this industry to change faster or basically become irrelevant in many ways.
So let me ask you about your model, because I agree with some of what you said, but disagree with some as well. And where I disagree might be nuance. Now, the name of your firm is RE Angels, which implies that you invest very early. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is correct. So we basically invest early on. We try to stay shy of pre-seed. Usually our comfort zone is seed to A, I think, where we see an initial product market fit, some revenues, and I think where we like to get comfortable, or basically where we want to judge you as an entrepreneur, is can your idea scale within the industry versus getting just an idea with a pitch deck and trying to assess whether can you execute on that idea.
Right. So I'm gonna say a few things. So listeners of this podcast are aware we pioneered this model, which was basically predicated on two questions. And this was 15, 16 years ago that we did this. The first is, can we use the product software service within what we call our portfolio matrix, which is defined as the buildings our limited partners own, the tenants, residents, and guests who work, live, and stay in those buildings, and then the vendors who serve all three. That's only half the equation, because like you, most of the companies that we look at probably can be used in some sense. But then the second question is the more important question, which is, can we potentially drive a venture return commensurate with the risk we're taking at the stage we're taking it? Meaning, in English, can we make a lot of money? Now, why is this so important? It's not, in my opinion, that real estate is antiquated. In fact, most of our 300 plus strategic real estate owners that own billions and billions of square feet are not antiquated. They're actually quite sophisticated. That's not the issue. The issue is that unless something becomes a need to have, the impetus to adopt something that's not demonstrably better than what they're already doing, which might be very analog, is very low. That's the unspoken secret. And essentially the key to our model. We've only invested in 40 some odd companies in 15 plus years. That's not a mistake. And so I look at this environment and I say, yes, you have, like you mentioned two things that are going to be forcing functions for technology disruption in real estate. First was the NAR settlement. I happen not to think that it's going to be as seismic as you might think, but I do think that it's going to cause many thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of real estate agents to drop out of the business. But secondarily, the second thing you mentioned, which I think really takes primacy here, is the advent of, or the evolution of software, AI software. I don't think AI is like a type form. When a few years ago, Alon, you probably remember when everyone was so hot on blockchain or metaverse or modular housing. We don't get trapped in that hype cycle, and you don't seem like the kind of person that would get trapped in that either. AI doesn't feel like that to us. It's more of, this is an evolution of how software is built and how it can be applied to a business model. That I do think you will see many real estate companies say, like, how can we use these companies or these processes to enhance our business? But I still don't see the wholesale rush into funding that thousands of companies that we've seen over the years, that most of them, while they could have been perfectly good businesses, have no place in a venture capital arena. That's what I'm curious about when you're looking at companies, because we will do pre-seed. We have actually done day one, which many people don't know that about us, but in very special circumstances, we will do extremely early, almost incubations. So I'm curious how you're thinking about sizing your check size, what you're specifically looking at. When you look at your portfolio, you obviously have I believe you have a lot of Israeli founders, which is great because they are I think we've seen a tremendous amount of Proptech coming out of the Middle East and Israel in particular, which has been really interesting. But that's what I'm curious about your model, with the context that I just laid about not necessarily being in an environment that is antiquated. Rather, I define it differently and say the status quo is good enough for most of these operators because they've been making so much money doing things exactly the way they have. So I'm curious how you think about the model in that context.
No, that's you raised fantastic points, along the way. And I think that as you said, I'm actually thinking about kind of like thematically very similar to you. Let's start with, I think the thing you mentioned about AI. AI is a tool. AI is not the answer. It's not the all and everything. And similar to you, when you're probably seeing companies presenting their ideas where they're relying only on AI, there is an issue. It needs to be a tool that help you be more efficient, but eventually you need to solve a problem, and a real problem. Now, we are just, I would say, a smaller version of Timber Creek. So we have about 20 operators that are RLPs, but in a very similar way, all our RLPs are industry professionals, and we're going after the individual. So basically, all our LPs are the operators that build billion-dollar platforms in real estate. So first and foremost, I couldn't agree more with you that I think in some ways the biggest challenge being a real estate tech investor is to trying to find a needle in the haystack, because there is so many ideas that are almost nice to have versus like really things that are gonna make a change or force a change. And in some ways, even from our LPs, we see it. I'm agreeing with you. By no means they are antiquated. Probably they internally using a lot of technology. But where you see lack of technology is in the ecosystem, in the everything that revolves around the transaction, so to speak, or the life cycle of the property. Now the challenge is, and I think where we excelling is when we hearing the idea, we basically starting to circulate it internally among our LPs and asking the fundamental question: would you take your wallet and pay for this service? Was that something that actually gonna change? And is that something that you've been craving for? And I give you an example. There was actually a company in the ESG space that presented to one of our LPs. And when we basically saw the idea, he immediately asked, how can I become a customer? I was actually looking for it in my design construction phase. So I think that's obviously a positive signal to tell you that we're going to make the investment. It's, there are other signals that we are looking for, but I think that's fundamentally what we're trying to see. I think the second thing is, and you touched it, is can it really become the $1 billion idea? And I know the $1 billion mark is sometimes overused, but I think as an investor, and especially early stage investor, that's kind of like your North Star. And you want to try to assess, is there a path that can take us there? And is there really a need in a big enough market? And usually where we come as philosophy, in our angel, we're trying to go after holistic solutions rather than point solutions or features in a problem. And I can give you an example. So for example, when we look at the property management space, so there are many companies that are offering point solutions in this entire journey of managing a property. For example, the leasing aspect, or the kind of like maintenance request, or the renovation, and so on. We end up investing in a very exciting company called Daisy. Maybe you came across them. And I think what they are doing in a very intriguing way is they are tackling the entire issue from start to finish. And they basically doing the property management in the properties, and in some ways becoming the operating system for the building. Now, we can argue if they're actually going to make it or not. I'm a big fan, of course. I'm biased. I made the investment, but from a kind of like hypothesis, we see a very concrete way of them scaling and becoming a $1 billion business, because there is so many buildings and there is so many problems in property management. And as any owner operator tell you, property management is almost like the necessary evil of the business. I don't know any owner that's excited about his property management activity. And if you can change that, that's something that is very interesting. So I hope I answered some of the question you raised, but happy to continue the dialogue.
No, that's great. That's great. And what is your, for those that are listening on the entrepreneurial side, what is your typical check size?
Yeah. So our typical check size is about $200,000 to $300,000. We are a follower by definition. So we will and we invest with leaders and big funds as yours, most often with generalist funds. So we invested with Foundation Capital, and we invested with Aleph from Israel, and AliCorp here, and Symbol. And there is many great names that we worked with and we're still working in. And we take a lot of pride because eventually we consider ourselves as a strategic partner. To your question actually before, in our name, right? RE Angels, right? Usually people ask, are you angels or are you like a fund? So we like to think ourselves as a fund, and we are bringing certainty of execution when we invest, but we're also very hands-on as an angel investor. So I think that where we compete is definitely not by the side of our check, Jeff, to your question, right? There are much larger check sizes. There are much bigger funds out there in the venture capital world. But I think where we can bring value is by one-click access to all these breadths of experience and network. And usually, and it's proven so far, that when there is an entrepreneur in his early days, we help them with their first sales. We help them kind of like think about the right go-to-market, get them in front of the key decision makers. And maybe you also agree with the fact that, very often when you think about complex industries, right, people will tell you, oh, probably the healthcare industry is very complex because you have so many stakeholders, right? It's the classic 3Ps. But in real estate, I think it's even more complex, right? Good luck selling your product when you have an owner, you have a tenant, you have a lender, you have a property manager, and figuring out how to navigate it. Because usually the person that cut you the check is not the person actually who makes the decision and not the person who end up using it. So I think this is where experience speaks above all, and it's very, very essential in the early days not to waste time and chasing maybe sometime months in order to get to a solution that you can, within a few phone calls or a few interactions with people who've been there, kind of like get you the shortcut.
I think there's three themes from the previous Proptech cycle that we can gather from all your excellent takes, which is founders and investors within Proptech really have to be thinking about, is a solution really making a process or solving a problem in a 10x better way than existing solutions or legacy systems? Then on the investor side in particular, thinking, is this going to generate a venture backable return? And this is something founders should absolutely consider, because there's, as we've discussed in this program before and will continue, there's great funding solutions out there that may be more aligned with solutions that may not be suited for venture backable return. However, something that Alon pointed out that I think is super important, and we've seen the shift from ingredients to solutions, is it like, and I always struggle with this one, because in the Peter Thiel world, becoming a monopoly in a niche of a process, and basically taking one small part of the property management process and basically building something for it, it might be 10x better. However, are you now requiring the users, in this case, leasing managers, property managers, to log into multiple systems or systems that aren't necessarily integrated as smoothly? Is that really making it 10x better now? So I think in this new wave of Proptech, we're certainly going to see more full-fledged solutions similar to Daisy in condo and residential property management, that I think truly make better the experience for the users and the customers, instead of just focusing on one part.
In the heart of Silicon Valley, there's an organization making waves in helping solve the housing crisis, Housing Trust Silicon Valley. At Housing Trust, they provide developer financing, homeownership assistance, and lender and broker resources to help create more equitable and affordable communities. Established over 20 years ago by local businesses, community leaders, and affordable housing activists, Housing Trust Silicon Valley uses transformative housing finance and public and private partnerships to create a strong, affordable housing market. From those experiencing homelessness to developers, renters, and first-time home buyers, Housing Trust SV is dedicated to ensuring that every neighbor has access to safe, stable, and affordable housing. Housing Trust SV is making a difference in the 14 counties of the Greater Bay Area and Sacramento. These are communities with a common need: more affordable housing and the capital to support its development. Join the Housing Trust SV in making a lasting impact on our communities. Housing Trust Silicon Valley, where innovation meets compassion. Learn more at housingtrustsv.org.
Alon, I'm curious. So would love to learn how you assess value and underwrite companies, founders, and ideas.
Absolutely. And Jeff, feel free, because I would love also to hear how you do it in Camber Creek. Obviously, you've seen probably 10x the amount of startups that we've seen. But I think, as we said, fundamentally, when we meet with a new startup, we're trying to, first of all, place it in the way we break out the real estate technology world, at least internally. So we have three verticals. We have the Proptech, or the technology evolving around the property themselves. We have the construction tech, which is basically technology that helps the entire construction journey. And also within it, you can have double click into sustainability and material. And the third one is this fascinating intersection between financial world, fintech, and real estate, which for some reason has been a bit neglected in the, I would say, rush to the gold within the fintech boom. Now, we trying internally just first of all to kind of like have a very good risk policy and kind of like diverse between those three verticals. But once we kind of like look into them, we're trying to figure out first and foremost is a problem that the startup is trying to solve is first of all exists, it's out there, or it's kind of like a new problem that owners not even aware of, or other stakeholders. And the second one is, I think that I many times see, does that, and to Jeff's point, require heavy behavioral change, or we just adding technology to help an existing pattern of behavior and make it more efficient, right? Because if you are trying to change the behavior, it's usually extremely hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think in some ways what's interesting about real estate, because technology has not been very integrated, as you see in other industries, you don't need to change to an exponential level. Even sometimes incremental changes can create a very sizable business. And like, take an example, we didn't invest in the company, but notarize, right? All they did is they took the notary process and make it virtual. And I think it sounds trivial, but it's very much moving the needle. And that's, I think, a classic example how in real estate, you don't require to create the next, so to speak, quantum computer. You just require to take a process and make it more streamlined and make it more efficient and make it hopefully more cost saving. And I think the third to your question, we're assessing the team. I think in the early stage, first and foremost, to see that you have a very strong entrepreneurs. We like to back teams. And last but not least, we like to go for software and not hardware. This is our decision internally. And there is no right and wrong here, but to Jeff's point, where we see sizable ability to generate this type of return is more in a software type of businesses rather than hardware businesses.
Interesting. Certainly, there's a science here behind it. It's I did read I think it was Alpaca VC that put out a survey from venture capital investors and how they assess and underwrite teams, and based on their survey, I think it was a little under 50% that basically was we underwrite teams based on vibes. And I mean, I know there's always the human element, and you have to like each other and believe that that founders can break through walls and make it happen and not give up and take as much rejection as usually is taken. But yeah, it's good to hear there's a scientific approach to this, and there's like vetting ideas with real world real estate professions.
And I'll add one more thing, and maybe it'll be curious to talk about it. But in the end of the day, I see a lot of entrepreneurs in Proptech or real estate technology that are targeting solely type of real estate focused VC. And I think that in order to really grow and to become the huge company, like the $1 billion again mark, you have to be able to also communicate and be understood by the generalist VCs of the world, because they are in them the majority. And I think that when we look at companies, we're also thinking internally with their solution, that team can also kind of like translate it to a non-real estate type of mindset. And I think that's very important, and almost like a suggestion from my side to entrepreneurs, because think about not just this round, but the next 3 rounds. If the Sequoia of the world can digest your idea, can understand simply what you're trying to solve, and will be willing to write you the check, and not just kind of like the real estate focused one. Because in the end of the day, you need the entire ecosystem to support you.
That is an interesting take, especially with what we've seen in the past couple of years with generalists. Some may say expressing a lot of interest or inflating a lot of the valuations, but it was more of an ecosystem and macro trends than the generalists themselves. But certainly they took a lot of the headlines. Something I want to go back to what you said earlier, and I also want to challenge and motivate and incentivize founders out there we certainly need the notarizers of the world. We need to be digitizing a lot of these processes that are still antiquated. We saw a couple of weeks ago here with Rome's CEO, Ronak, that are basically streamlining and digitizing assumable mortgages, which is something that has existed out there for a while, and now it's only now becoming digitized, basically. But in terms of the behavioral change, I think this is the period in history where we have the higher likelihood of basically achieving behavioral change. And I want to give a shout out here in particular. The most recent that comes to mind is Roots, Invest with Roots, with whose founder, Daniel Dorfman, based out of Atlanta, we had here last year. They are basically allowing renters to, and I'm not saying this is necessarily venture backable, that's up to the investors and the founder to decide, but they're allowing renters to also invest in the property that they live in. And this way, it's basically incentivizing renters to take care of their apartments as if they own it, because they do own. And this is, again, fundamentally behavioral change, basically reinventing the landlord and renter relationship. And I want to see more of that, because I feel there's higher likelihood of behavioral change in this era that we're living in right now.
And I think,
yeah.
To what you said, by the way, in Roots, when I think about it, the notion of rent to own has been out there probably for dozens of years, right? But I think what Roots are doing, they're digitizing it in some way. And I think that when you see that type of opportunity, that becoming intriguing and interesting. Obviously, there's the entire social impact aspect that Roots are doing, which I think is fabulous, and probably within our seat as investors, we can support companies that are for profit, that are generating outside return, but also create good. One company, I think you met with the founder in our New York Tech event, Taflif, Wissam, that helping minority subcontractors, basically. And we can elaborate, but I think that's an interesting aspect of our responsibility also as investors.
Absolutely. And shout out to Wissam Akra from Taflif, great company, great founder. Now, in terms of the value, I mean, you've hinted at this, Alon, but what value is RE Angels providing to founders and to LPs, and how are you differentiating yourself?
Sure. So let's separate that question into two buckets. And so I think to founders, we touched it a bit before, but first and foremost is this one-click access to all the breadth of experiences that our LP brings with them. So as mentioned before, our LPs are the individuals, not the platforms that build the platforms. So they are entrepreneurs on their own. And I think we also managed to collect in a very kind of like structured way folks in every vertical of the value chain of real estate. So within commercial, residential, the debt business, the leasing and construction, design engineering, and so on. I think second is to founders is just, an ability to sit down and actually think in a very strategic way, how can we basically go, especially in the early days, who are the stakeholders, what is the go-to market, and make those introductions, not just talk about it, but actually put them in front of a few clients. And in the due diligence process, as we spoke before with Jeff, this is part of what we do. We introduce them to our LPs, and LPs becoming their customers along the way. And by the way, that's the strongest signal that we can get. Now, to your second part of the question, what value we bring to our LP. So obviously, part of it is already answered in my previous answer, right? They becoming a customer and now having technology that can make their lives better and their business more successful, they'll be the happiest there are. But also, I think many of them are just curious, and many of them want to learn what's out there and what's new. And they're looking at RE Angels as sort of a beacon to see where the industry is shifting and what's out there and what are the trends and what they should think about, right? It's like, I'll give you an example. Probably everybody now talking about tenant experience. And it's almost like becoming a very prominent kind of like topic, but what does it really mean? And what does it really, and how does it really move the needle to the landlord or to the owner? And I think that's where you can see where hopefully your job and the fund to educate and bring those ideas and those solutions that actually helping to reduce churn and helping to tenants to take care better of their property. And there are many ways to do it. And there's, in some ways, I think a lot of investors in the real estate world, not the technology world, coming to slowly and understanding that the income line of the business has been pushed to the limit in the last few years. Like, I don't think that you can continue buying properties and kind of like just like increasing rents and hoping that, you know, the NOI will go up and valuation will go up. I think now we're almost entering a period where you need to think, how do I reduce expenses? How do I increase my NOI through efficiency? And I think this is where there is a lot of intellectual curiosity among our LPs into those solutions and those startups that can help them basically make their valuation higher.
Super interesting.
The future of real estate is here. And by here, I mean at Blueprint in Las Vegas this September. Join the largest, most global gathering of industry leaders and innovators leading the charge in changing the built world, from construction to transaction, for 3 days of networking, learning, and ecosystem advancement. With trillions of dollars of assets and the best global innovators under one roof, the future of the built world happens here at Blueprint. Blueprint 2024 takes place at the Venetian Las Vegas from September 17th to 19th. Tangent listeners get a $300 discount for their ticket by visiting blueprintvegas.com/tangent. That's blueprintvegas.com/tangent for a $300 discount for your Blueprint ticket. See y'all there.
I don't want to dive into a couple of your portfolio companies that stood out to me. Paraspot, computer vision inspections for logistics, real estate, and other assets. Tell us more and what caught your eye.
Sure. And interesting you mentioned that was actually our latest investment. So it's kind of like very fresh.
Secrets out.
Exactly. And we also would like to thank FFVC, who led the round and who we partner with on that investment. I think, you know, virtual inspection has been out there for quite some time, and there is many players that are doing fantastic work. Where, in my opinion, Paraspot standing out is they managed to focus on a very specific segment. So instead of going after the inspection relating to the transaction of buying and selling a property, they actually focusing around the incremental changes that are happening in the move in the move out,
the turnover.
In a multifamily operation, the turnover, exactly. And when you think about it, that actually is the most frequent activities that happening within the real estate journey rather than the transaction. So there is obviously a much bigger total addressable market here. But what's even more intriguing, and when you look at real estate and you think about the amount of unicorns compared to the other type of kind of like vertical within venture, you won't see as much. And I think part of it is because real estate technology usually defined or almost like have regulatory issues that it's hard to scale global. There is not a lot of ideas that you can easily take and replicate around the world. And the most notable one is, for example, Airbnb, right? The activity of taking your place and renting it or subleasing it to a short duration, you can do it in China, you can do it in Europe, you can do it in the United States. I think what Paraspot is doing is one of those very simple yet replicable ideas that you can do in Europe, in the United States, and in Asia. This turnover happening almost the same. The activity of someone is moving out, someone is moving in, you need to inspect your property to make sure there is no damages. And I think as investors, that's something that got us very, very excited about their ability and, to Jeff's point, potential to grow exponentially.
Super interesting. Yeah, it's one of the universal things of real estate across borders, right? Turnover of units. So what do they do exactly? They take images and they run computer vision machine learning to basically detect wear and tear or damages or what needs to be done.
Yeah, you pretty much described it correctly. So they're enabling the tenants, which I think it's a very interesting value proposition for the landlords. So the landlords don't need to send a person, the super or whoever is in charge from the leasing office, to inspect the unit. The tenants themselves take their phone, and they support every type of phone. So either it's Android or iPhone, and they basically walk through their apartment, and it's a guided kind of like gamified experience. And within minutes, they scan their entire apartment, and the landlord receives a report showing kind of like all the different damages or lack of inventory if it's a short-term rental. And against that, basically the entire security deposit process is being kind of like taken care of I think more so, I was surprised about how they managed to get tenants on board to participate in it, because originally I was a bit skeptical. But the more we dive into it, we understood that they're solving a very big friction that happened in the real estate world around the security deposit. Mm-hmm. Think about yourself, even Edward, right? When you're renting a unit, the entire notion of like, did something was really damaged by you or not is very subjective. And landlords usually don't feel comfortable with that experience. I think once you put a computer vision or basically fact-based experience, it's much easier transaction to both sides. And the kind of like back and forth reduces dramatically.
Super interesting. And without naming names, but I can certainly tell you that they may be some institutional residential owners out there that may not love it because they are used to just deducting from the security deposit automatically for every renter. And it may or may not have been Sam Zell's former company, but we're not naming names here. Anyway, super interesting. What about Waltz? Talking about enabling international investments or cross borders. Waltz, like dancing, the waltz. They are enabling foreigners to invest in U.S. real estate. Tell us more.
Sure. So Waltz tackling, I think, a very obvious but yet huge problem, almost a vacuum. And me, myself, as moving to the States and being a foreigner, can relate to it. If you want to try to buy an investment property, but you don't have the classic kind of like banking checkbox of having a credit score and social security, it's very hard to be bankable or get financing. And I think what they are basically offering is exactly stepping into where the traditional banking lacks, offering of ability to offer loans and underwrite it with an alternative set of points of what is your actual income, what's your asset base. And actually, when you look at real estate, it's an asset-based lending. So can you structure maybe a loan that is protected, even though maybe the person that being underwritten is not the most easily underwritten, right? So it's almost like bringing the commercial mindset into the private sector. And there's other players that do something very similar out there. I think it's $1 trillion almost vacuum. And I'm excited about having a lot of players because I think they're not competing each other. They are just helping the entire economy, so to speak, move that way. And eventually, in my opinion, the traditional banking will move that way. And they probably gonna less and less rely on the traditional checkboxes, the traditional way that probably were invented 50 years ago. And if anything, that will just accelerate and make our life easier. Even, by the way, the domestic, as being an American, usually getting a mortgage, you need to jump into so many hoops that if I'll tell you, hey, I can make this process instead of 60 days of hell, 2 days of few clicks and you are gone, and would you pay an additional point to do it? Most likely half of the room will raise their hand and say yes. And I think that is something very inspiring and unique. And obviously we backing them, not to mention that the founders are good friends of mine. So also the personal connection always help.
The vibes matter always. No, super interesting. And I think, when it comes to the macro trends and flight to safety and what's going on around the world, if in the US we're grappling with inflation and internal division or polarization, it always replicates around the world, usually not in a worse way, unfortunately. So I think the flight to safety and desire to invest and own U.S. real estate will be there. And I think regardless of I think Chinese real estate investors have sold over $30 billion of U.S. real estate in the last few years with basically the decoupling of our two superpowers. I think there are definitely plenty of interest around the world for investors to get into U.S. real estate. Alon, last but not least, collaboration superpower. If you could choose one person, historic or living, to do a partnership with, who would it be?
Wow. Well, I would love to collaborate with Jeff on an investment, but...
By the way, that's the first time anyone has ever answered the right answer.
The only right answer.
That's the right
Finally.
answer. Other people are like, George Washington or Moses or Jesus. I'm like, really? That's just not realistic.
We're Proptech Jesus here.
Well, Jeff, to your point, as an investor, we're trying to be practical. So what's more practical than sitting with a leader VC and saying, hey, let's work together.
Like, even if you would have said our wonderful, sometimes available co-host, Zach Aarons, I would have said, I agree. Zach is approachable, wonderfully eccentric, sometimes here, and he'd be someone that you could collaborate with. You cannot collaborate with Gandhi.
Not yet, at least.
Okay.
Not yet, at least. Generative AI may allow us, but not yet.
You know, that actually is a good point. I take it all back. But it would be a reflection or a refraction of what those people were and could be versus actually who they are. But we've given you enough time. No more stalling. Who is it?
If I could get Warren Buffett to collaborate and take his entire very, very traditional approach and convince him that he should invest in real estate technology, I think first it will bring tremendous value. Second, it will be almost like if you manage to convince him, you probably convince everyone else. And third, I think he's extremely smart, like he brings so much knowledge. And to Jeff's point, by the way, he understands very well, to his credit, and history shows, which businesses are cash generating, very good businesses, can scale very well. So I think having someone like him in the investment committee can be an amazing asset.
Well, he does already touch Proptech through a variety of his working businesses and some of the partnerships I know that they have, whether it's directly under the auspices of the Oracle of Omaha, I do not know. But you heard it here first. I believe Warren Buffett is actually an avid listener of the Tangent podcast. Unfortunately, not the Warren Buffett in Omaha, but I think he's in Parsippany, New Jersey, our listener, our Warren Buffett. Hey there. By the way, for anyone who took that seriously, just kidding.
So interesting choice, and certainly Oracle of Omaha, his famous letters recommended for everyone to read. But curious time for being Warren Buffett in Proptech, because I think his company, Berkshire Hathaway, and his company also related to home services, they're the last major brokerage in the NAR commission fight. Basically, NAR settled with a multi-million-dollar settlement for basically fixing buyers' commissions. But Warren Buffett's company is the last defendant there. So we'll see, maybe partnering with Alon will make them see the light.
Well, they made, I think, was it last year? They made a very big bet on most of the national home builders.
That's right.
I think, to Jeff's point, indirectly, they are investing in the real estate technology, but I think they see definitely, we have a huge shortage. That's not a secret, about 4 million homes shortage, right? So call me crazy, right, but I don't think you can fix it with just building them in the old way of like taking a brick and putting another brick. Probably need to do it faster. So They know what they do.
For sure. And shout out to Nick Narodny from Alto, CEO of Alto, who was here on the pod a few months ago and predicted that the NAR commission will unfold this year much faster than expected. Alon, where can Tangent listeners connect with you and learn more about RE Angels and your wonderful portfolio companies?
Sure. So first, you can search on Google, and our website is reangels.vc. But second, also follow our LinkedIn page. We have a lot of updates there. And obviously, feel free to connect with me or anyone else in our team. We're more than happy if you're an entrepreneur or a fellow investor or just want to grab a drink and talk real estate technology in New York.
Or if you're Warren Buffett and are looking to get into Proptech VC as well, please feel free to reach out.
But if Warren Buffett showed up, I give it to Jeff. It has to be with me and Jeff together on one investment.
Alon Gorbonos, founder and managing partner at RE Angels, an angel fund focused on real estate technology, offering critical connections and capital to early stage startups. Thank you so much for coming to Tangent today, Alon.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review Tangent and share the show with a friend. This episode is produced by me, Edward Cohen. Thanks for listening to Tangent, and remember, collaboration is our superpower. So stay curious and always be learning.